Okay, awesome. Well, welcome everybody. My name is Dr. Patel. I'm excited to have everyone join. Talk a little bit about education on mesenchymal stem cells. Um, if you haven't finished your holiday shopping, what a great gift a stem cell treatment could make for yourself. So, hope you get some information out of this. My goal is to provide a general overview of stem cells, what we know, sort of what we currently know about existing market, and really the goal is for you to come away with an understanding on how to make an educated choice. So with that, I'll get started. I'm thankful for Cellcolabs Clinical for having me here today. Just a little bit about myself. So I am in the field of interventional orthopedics and spine care. I provide a lot of non-operative treatments, and a lot of the journey for myself started with using PRP, bone marrow aspirate concentrate, and adipose and autologous procedures, so from your own body. And we've been seeing tremendous results from that. I am in the United States, more in the New York area. As I know, we'll probably have people from all around the world. Super exciting. And, for me, the passion is around really starting to understand that on this whole idea of longevity and chronic disease, one of the most important parts is also preserving your physical longevity. For me, a life without movement would not maybe be the ideal life. So that's where we come in and talking about how cells could actually improve physical performance and injury prevention and arthritis. So that's my key focus. So what are mesenchymal stem cells? So what we have to understand really about stem cells, right, is that stem cells are like the building blocks of all living organisms. They're unique and unspecialized in the beginning, and they have a great capacity for self-renewal. And then they can develop into different cell types, such as muscle, bones, nerves, organs. So it's like the building block of everything. And we know that they're sourced from three major sources currently, and that is bone marrow, adipose, fat tissue, and umbilical cord. And I'm sure if you're exploring stem cells, you've heard of all of these, and especially umbilical cord and bone marrow tend to be the most that people have heard about. And if we believe, which we do, that, and we know from the science that MSCs have three inherent properties. And this is kind of the basis of the most important part of how it can have such an impact on the body. One, they are regenerative, so they have regenerative potential. They are anti-inflammatory, and they are immunomodulatory. So I want you to remember that because that's what you really need to take away and then think about how this is going to get applied to health and wellness and disease in the future. And a great Harvard physician talked about stem cells and said that they have the potential to do it for chronic disease, what antibiotics did for infectious disease. So there was such an impact when we developed antibiotics, and people didn't die from simple skin infections, now more complicated infections. Stem cells have that same sort of impact for chronic disease. And so essentially you might say, well, is this a medicine? And in some aspects, yes, we are creating medicine, but we're creating it from a very natural source, which is your own body. And so, what's in the name? And this is where a lot of people sometimes get confused, is that, you know, Arnie Kaplan was what we call in the United States one of the grandfathers of stem cells, talked about stem cells and MSCs as maybe we misnamed them, and he called them medicinal signaling cells. So what they're actually doing is they're going into the body, okay? And when you have an injury, let's go over what happens in the body. So you injure something in your body, parasites reside on your blood vessels, and they get released when they have vessel damage or there's inflammation. And they basically provide this activated MSC. That activated MSC secretes bioactive molecules that are immunomodulatory. So they prevent from ischemic injury or injury of other sites. They provide immune surveillance, and then they provide a barrier protecting against, the invitation of autoimmune reactions. And then they secrete trophic agents. And if you see in trophic agents, basically that's what creates the regenerative microenvironment from which we can regenerate tissue. Uh, and so if we look at this, we have to understand that there's two things happening. It's basically activating in our own body, but as we age, the thought process is maybe our ability to generate sort of an activated MSC and stimulate a regenerative process begins to decline. So our body can't respond in the way that it used to at a younger age. And that's where the idea around using stem cells as a source of, let's say, medicine within the body to stimulate our own healing comes really into play. And so many of you might have heard of this term inflammaging, right? And what is inflammaging? So we talk about it as like this chronic, low-grade inflammation in our body that gradually builds up as we age. And what happens, right? So with this, what generally happens is the immune system ages and loses its ability to function effectively and regulate inflammation. And that's the key. We need the immune system to be strong and regulate inflammation. We have aging cells, and they start to accumulate in the body. And as they accumulate in the body, they start to secrete inflammatory cytokines. So things, again, that cause increased inflammation in your body. Furthermore, you have this issue around aging mitochondria. Many people have heard about mitochondrial health, and they start to produce more reactive oxygen species with age, again, leading to cellular damage and inflammation. Then we have this chronic environmental stressors that we put into our body, the pollution we're exposed to, toxins, poor diet, sedentary lifestyle. That's a constant stimulation on the immune system. So you're wearing it out. And then we also know the big association with the gut microbiome. So gut microbiome imbalance causes changes in our bacterial composition, impairs gut health, and allows toxins to enter the bloodstream. So when you look at all of these different aspects and you start to break it down, you'll say, wow, if all these things start happening in my body and ultimately my immune system is not in balance, there's areas contributing to more inflammation, what happens? And this is kind of where we have to understand the impact of inflammation on chronic disease. So heart disease and stroke really comes from impaired endothelial function or plaque formation and instability as a result of inflammation in the blood. Diabetes, we get insulin disruption, we get impaired glucose uptake and insulin resistance. And cancer inflammation can encourage cell survival and proliferation. And then there's the concept around neurodegenerative disorders. And if we think about this, this is a high place of interest right now. And we know that comes from, again, a part of it is oxidative stress and neurotoxin release. Close to my heart, bone health and osteoarthritis, we know it causes bone resorption. It causes more than formation, and then it can cause cartilage to degrade. And then the other idea that is around sarcopenia and muscle loss, where we get a sort of dysfunction between breakdown and synthesis of muscle, so that it affects all different aspects of our body. And then, one of these systems is where you start to, first feel symptoms. And so the whole goal around the future, I believe, of health is like we need to really control inflammation in our body. And that's being done, right? There's lifestyle management that people are talking about, anti-inflammatory diets, okay, taking supplements, exercise to reduce fat, improve our immune function, build muscle, meditation, breath work, ultimately in relaxing our body, not putting it in a sympathetic state, but more of a parasympathetic state, using probiotics, prebiotics, improving the gut microbiome, and ultimately trying other supplements like curcumin and resveratrol, and there's a bunch of them out there. We won't go into much detail today, but you can see that, wow, we can make lifestyle changes. But ultimately, and especially, unfortunately, as we get older, some of those changes may not be enough, and our body is still stuck, and it needs that sort of boost or reset. And so remember, what did I talk about? The three inherent properties of stem cells were: they're immunomodulatory, they're anti-inflammatory, and they're regenerative. And I just mentioned, and we kind of went through how we get to certain chronic diseases as a result of aging and inflammation, and how the immune system plays a role. So this is the most important concept that I want you to take away, and how this all comes together and why there's such future promise around MSCs. We know, right? So now it comes to the idea of, well, would I want to consider this? The most important thing for you to consider right now is safety. Am I doing something that is safe for my body? Because over time, I assure you that we're going to figure out the indications and get to a much more efficacy around certain indications over others. But right now, we have to understand that, one, MSCs are considered immunoprivileged, meaning they do not require any patient donor matching when they are manufactured in the correct way with the right protocols and the right research behind them. There was a large meta-analysis looking for high quality MSC trials, and they covered 3,500 patients. And it showed that MSCs did not show statistically significant association with severe side effects. This is the number one question that I get. Secondly, there is no evidence from those high quality studies that there's evidence of tumor development caused by MSCs have been found. It's another very important thing that people want to take away. And then it comes down to, well, what would I consider? What MSC might I consider in my body? And I'm not here to take away that all, three main sources of stem cells that we've talked about, bone marrow, adipose, and umbilical cord, have potential. But at this phase, the most important thing for me in my decision to use IV stem cells, and I did receive a dose of 100 million stem cells myself, was that to really understand where is the data on what is most potentially safe and efficacious at this time. And bone marrow far exceeds all the others at present time. That's an extremely important consideration. And then we got to decide, like, there's all this idea around medical clinics and tourism, and a lot of people tell me, oh, well, I know a guy. And I really caution people that to do your homework, to understand who's collaborating, who's involved in this clinic, what's really behind it, not just what they're offering. When you're look for qualified physicians. When you're looking for procedures, make sure you understand the process with which they deliver the biologic, because in the orthopedic world, you really have to deliver what we call precision delivery. It really has to be right where we think the pain sources are and what tissues we're hoping to regenerate, or at least control inflammation around for a longer period of time. And then we have to understand the quality of the product. We really want to know that our cell suppliers have stringent protocols to ensure cell viability and sterility. That is really the risk. The risk is around the process of how the cell will get delivered. Is it viable, and is it sterile at the time of procedure? And you need to know that every clinic is supported by a CGMP lab. This is the part that I feel that people might miss, is that you go to a clinic and they're offering stem cells and they don't fully even understand. They've just gotten this product, but they don't really understand what it means to be a CGMP lab, and you can trust the source of where it comes from. And then if you're looking at different countries, you want to ask yourself, well, what is really this country's governing body and regulatory oversight over the supplier, the clinic, and how cells are administered in that country? Because you're making a big choice in your life to use MSCs, and really should not be a lot of risks based on what I told you the literature is showing. But the risks come in not knowing the key components of the process to ensure a safe procedure. So when we talked about this, a little bit like who's overseeing the administration of these cells, because the most important thing you need to know is that we currently have very, very, very few approved indications for allogenic stem cells in the world. I am happy to let you know that I have never before seen so many studies currently going on in medicine around stem cells. So it's an extremely, extremely exciting time. However, when you're looking to get stem cells, you might want to look up and say, well, where I'm about to go to get stem cells, is it a place that is going through an approved clinical trial by a national regulatory authority? Because someone is then overseeing the administration of these cells. And are they following strict regulatory guidelines and scientific protocols? That's when your risk is significantly reduced. So just to kind of summarize this, what's important is MSCs are extremely, extremely safe. We've proven that in the science. Where does the risk come in? The risk comes in when along the process of manufacturing and delivery of cells, something is not followed. And that's where the risk becomes a lot higher for you. So I tell people that not all cells are created equal. And we have to understand that your provider is using cells from a good manufacturing practice facility. And these facilities are certified throughout the world with the same standards. So ask for the certificate, ask to see it when you make that call, verify it for yourself. And why is it so important? Because I mentioned again, complications with these therapies should be rare. And a part of my passion into getting into this space was because probably about 2 or 3 years ago, what we began to experience was the proliferation of unregulated stem cell clinics, and particularly in countries with less stringent medical oversight, possessing significant risks. And what we felt was, at least for the United States, that patients were seeking these treatments, and because they'd heard about them, and we could not provide them much guidance on that. And so this collaboration that came together with our team at Physical Longevity and Cellcolabs allowed us this perfect bridge for when we felt there was something worth pursuing around IV or local injection of allogeneic bone marrow derived stem cells. We could guide patients to a safe program and location and cell line that we felt comfortable for them to using, because the FDA has issued a lot of warnings about unproven stem cell treatments. And sometimes we feel challenged by the FDA, but really ultimately they're really looking after safety and trying to prevent serious health complications in what is still somewhat of a wild, wild west and hard for them to enforce. So a little bit about Cellcolabs' process. They have a GMP aseptic manufacturing facility at the Karolinska Institute campus. And with over 20 years of experience and data, 150 plus publications. And they had the initial part was 150 patients with promising results and no serious side effects. And when they started to look at that, that's kind of how this whole idea around Cellcolabs has been developed, that we needed to kind of get this out to more people and allow them to pursue that. And we've gone over this, so I won't talk about it too much, but remember, we want to be certified for good manufacturing. They're an approved tissue establishment, and they're also approved for manufacturing of MSCs for the use of clinical trials. And that's something that all that is done at the Karolinska Institute. I've been in multiple discussions and hearing about how other hospitals in other countries that want to run clinical trials are selecting their cells to be provided to them to run these trials. So it's not just Cellcolabs talking about their product, but other people are choosing them to help them advance the field. And so let's talk a little bit about how donor and prep cell, how this works, because a lot of people ask. And we really need to understand donor quality control. What typically happens is we know that after the age of 30, our sort of viability of our own stem cells can decline. And so that's how donors are typically aged 18 to 30. They go through a battery of infectious disease tests. They go through general hematology and biochemistry tests. They have a full medical examination, history and questionnaire completed, and then they have the bone marrow extracted. And from that, there's analysis methods of MSCs. One, you need to make sure that they have the right amount of MSC surface marker expression. Those are the type of MSCs you want to isolate, and that's at greater than 90%. There's no contaminating cells, okay? And they do a viability calculation. They look at the morphology of the cells under a microscope, and they follow all the different guidelines around ensuring chromosome stability and other sterility factors. And so this is really important because this is where I feel that there's not a great understanding. There's definitely 3 key different stem cell sources: bone marrow, fat, umbilical cord. And we know that bone marrows are most exclusively studied, and there's no current sources proven universally superior in efficacy. There's no head-to-head studies. Anyone who tells you umbilical cord is better or bone marrow is better than umbilical cord, we don't know the answer. I hope with time, and I do believe with time, each of these different stem cell sources will prove to have value in people's health. But right now, there's no head-to-head comparison. And I often hear people telling me that, well, I heard that this type of stem cell source, and it's typically about umbilical cord, is better because. And there's really no science to support that at this time. So when we understand the three sources, we need to understand pros and cons, okay? The pros I've talked about a little bit, but bone marrow has high anti-inflammatory effect, safest, most published. Um, Adipose in the future, maybe we are going to get a better high stem cell yield from adipose and can have lower costs of administrating adipose tissue. Um, we know that umbilical cord can be very valuable because it's non-invasive. There's no harvesting procedure. And at the end of the day, we'll be able to, expand doses from that. However, currently, the concerns around some of the cons is what I want you to understand is that other than the initial harvesting procedure, really bone marrow has very few cons. The issue that comes up when people are selecting IV administration that I want you to understand is that your body, sometimes with umbilical cord cells, when not dosed appropriately, and sometimes the doses are actually divided. So good clinics will give several doses on different days. You can still get this initial inflammatory response. And with that, sometimes steroids are administered. So people leave feeling really good, but sometimes it's just a steroid effect and not really related to the cells. The most important one is that the risk of blood clotting due to a higher expression of tissue factor is puts people at high risk with umbilical cord. And unfortunately, right now, people do experience as complications related to that when one, people don't know how to manage it, prevent it, or they're not dosing it correctly when it's administered. So, at the end of the day, it goes back to when you make a clinic selection, you really need to also understand not just what cell you're going to get, but do they have the protocols? Do they understand how to administer their cells safely? And we have a very strict protocol in the Bahamas with Cellcolabs on how we administer our cells. And that's extremely important that science is working with clinicians delivering the care to ensure patient safety and outcomes. And so we know there's a lot of current hotspots for overseas clinics. I mean, most of these on this list, who wouldn't want to visit? But there are some very reputable clinics, and a lot of what I'm appreciating about uh, this current project with Cellcolabs is that we are able to actually, start to talk between the different clinics that are using the same cells and refine protocols together and kind of learn from one another. And it's really exciting because people choose to work with Cellcolabs because of their rigor to science and safety, and that gives us so much more confidence to explore the clinical applications. Um, and I want to just kind of talk through a few things if you're in the United States. In the United States, the FDA is very clear. It's the physicians and sometimes the operators who are not clear on this, and that is we can provide autologous therapies. What is an autologous therapy? That is a harvest of either sometimes PRP, which is mostly growth factors, and or bone marrow and adipose from your own body. We can process that in a minimally manipulative way, so we can't manipulate it, and then we can re-inject it into your body on the same day. And it's effective, and we've seen great results. Sometimes what we're trying to figure out at this point is like, well, we're learning that dose matters. And that's where this idea of allogenic therapy, which is donated and a known dose of stem cells, could have much more impact on the outcomes. And so, currently the FDA is clear. There's no allogenic or culture expanded treatments allowed in the United States. Furthermore, Wharton's jelly, amniotic fluid, processing adipose through a procedure many of you might heard of called SVF, and exosomes are illegal in the United States. There's no approved exosome product in the United States at this time. Does that mean that I don't believe exosomes will have a role in healthcare? I do believe they will have a role in the future, but that is the current state. Let's be clear, no products have been approved for the treatment or prevention of COVID. None of the products have been approved for treatment of any orthopedic condition, such as osteoarthritis, tendonitis, disc disease, and you can read that entire list. None of them have been approved to treat any neurologic disorder, such as MS, ALS, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's disease. We don't have approvals because we don't have trials that show that it actually works for that condition. right? And what's unfortunately happening is people are marketing it as a treatment for a specific condition. And this is the important thing I want people to understand is if we go back to the beginning of the discussion around inflammation, chronic inflammation, how that leads to chronic disease, and how stem cells can impact that, you can start to see sort of the intersection of how the potential of these cells to impact any of the conditions that are listed here. But no one should be telling you that it's approved and will treat that condition because we just don't fully know. I can speak from an orthopedic perspective in that I have seen tremendous impact in controlling inflammation on any of the conditions here, as well as potentially in some patients showing changes and structural changes on pre and post MRIs. But I still cannot tell you that it's approved or it's definitely going to work for you, but we've just seen incredible results, and that's what we're studying more with Cellcolabs. And, this is really comes down to a lot of what we have, it already exists within our own body. And what we're really excited about is the ability to harness our own body's potential to heal. And what's come out of this is in MSK, we realize that, and that's musculoskeletal conditions, a lot of the environments that when you get an injury, okay, they don't have great blood supply. It's not like the skin. You cut yourself on the skin, it heals very easily because there's great blood supply. And that delivers a continuous amount of cells to regenerate tissue, and your skin regrows. And it doesn't really happen as well in MSK. And so we need to deliver cells to the area to control inflammation or potentially stimulate tissue repair. And so we've gone over safety. Okay. And what I really like about MSCs in orthopedics is it's very natural. What people don't understand is cortisone is like a short-term fix on pain, but it's actually catabolic, which means the after effect of it is actually breaking down tissue. I always equate it to the fire department coming in and there's a fire, okay, and they wash out the fire, but everyone just walks away and nobody's coming by to remodel. It's just going to be what it is. And so now we're looking at using this in a way of trying to avoid surgery and treating the in-between of pain as an alternative to cortisone. And then you also get that remodeling potential. And what we're seeing on the anti-inflammatory side is a lot of studies are showing when you use cell therapy, you're getting sustained pain relief for 1 year or more. And most cortisone studies show 6 months or less. People are finding improved quality of life and higher level of function. And I want to highlight this for a moment because a lot of people will look at regenerative. They want to see bone remodeling. They want to promote tissue repair and see things get repaired. And that is possible. But the most important thing to you be able to function and use your joints is that it doesn't hurt. And if you don't have a mechanical problem, which means it doesn't like lock or is unstable, okay? If you don't have pain, for an extended period of time using cells, you can have an improved quality of life and higher level of function. That's really ultimately what we want when we're dealing with our physical body. And how might MSCs help osteoarthritis? So we've talked about how the MSCs modulate the inflammatory cytokine immune response, and they do that in the joint as well by secretion of the paracrine factors, so those trophic factors. They cause release of something called EVs or exosomes. So kind of going back and bringing this together, the exosomes and what people are talking about is actually something that's released from an MSC, and then they're isolating that. So that's why they believe there's value in exosomes. And what they do through direct cell-to-cell contact with immune cells is they cause a decrease in the inflammatory immune cells, okay? And they increase the regulatory immune cells. So they improve the ones that can control inflammation. And then the biggest part is that they shift these cells in your body called macrophages. I call them like little Pac-Man cells. And a lot of them in your body are pro-inflammatory cells, okay, M1. And that's what happens in chronic disease and in your joint. And that's why it's like this joint is full of M1, pro-inflammatory cells, and they control your joint and they just cause pain. And the flip happens in that they cause a conversion to M2, or an anti-inflammatory phenotype, stem cells do, which results increased release of anti-inflammatory cytokines and ultimately reduces the inflammatory environment in your joint, reduces pain, and that allows the potential for promotion of cartilage repair. So let's kind of summarize and what we're talking about when we talk about basic requirements for optimal overseas stem cell clinics, because we've covered a lot, at least when I'm talking about MSK. You want to make sure that people doing procedures are qualified physicians in regenerative medicine or delivering procedures such as sports medicine, pain medicine, PM&R, orthopedics. They use image-guided procedures, so ask, will you be using image guidance? Will you be using ultrasound or fluoroscopy? Spine procedures cannot be done blind. And also, like blind meaning no image guidance, okay? And the other piece is that we have to be very cautious. On some of these cells, they're not really ready to be administered in certain spots of the spine. In our trial, we do administer the MSCs to the joints and the ligaments. Okay, in a future date, hopefully we'll be able to deliver it around the nerves and potentially the discs. And is the trial that I'm looking at collecting data? A lot of people kind of raise an eyebrow when you say, well, it's a clinical trial. Actually, the clinical trial is the safest place for you to actually participate, because we will follow up with you for a year. If you are having an issue, we will follow up and help you through that adverse event. And we haven't experienced any, but we're here for you. And the result is that when you go to another overseas clinic, sometimes I see people just go and they come back and there's no follow-up. So a trial is actually more beneficial to you. This is probably the most important. The next bullet is the most important decision point for us working with Cellcolabs Clinical, and that is that the cells are tested for viability at the time they're delivered to me. So what happens essentially is the cells are reconstituted in a hospital in the Bahamas, and before they leave the lab to come to the clinic, they're tested. And they are tested to ensure that they have maximum viability and sterility. And that's extremely important because I don't see a lot of clinics doing that. And you want to know that you have a viable dose at the time of delivery. We have full reporting, we have external oversight, and make sure that the clinics that you really feel that they have trust and they have transparency in answering their questions. I'm fortunate to be working with 4 great thought leaders on our team. Who've probably combined, we probably have over 50 years of experience in regenerative orthobiologics. And it started way back with PRP 15 plus years ago. And Dr. Sampson introduced me to PRP, and we run one of the most well-known global regenerative medicine conferences called TOBI. So it's a great group extending from New York to San Francisco and LA that are participating. And the important thing to know about Cellcolabs Clinical Study is that the Bahamas recognizes it. It's approved by the Bahamas National Stem Cell Ethics Committee. These cells come deeply frozen in containers shipped from Sweden in liquid nitrogen with deep GPS temperature tracking. This is interesting because I've heard of clinics that will just FedEx the dose or ship the dose overnight to another clinic. And, you know, I know that over time and the cell's not staying frozen, they lose viability. And then you talk about distance, and there's so many factors involved in transportation that these cells are actually tracked to ensure they stay frozen. They're then reconstituted like I talk about. We check their viability, ensuring that the number of live cells per dose is the dose that we tell you we're going to give you, which is 50 million stem cells. And we'll go over sort of how that breaks down should you choose to participate in the MSK study in just a minute. And you have the ability also to check your biomarkers for inflammation and hormones and a lot of longevity biomarkers that are analyzed in Sweden independently. And the other thing that's really important is after reconstitution, so that's kind of thawing the cells, a small sample is also sent to ensure sterility testing is maintained. So all the components that are important for you getting a safe procedure are covered. So how can you participate? So currently the max dose treatment is 200 million stem cells. And you can make the decision, if you have pain or an MSK condition, to have a systemic infusion, okay, of 100 million MSCs and up to 2 local injections. So let's say you had shoulder problem and a knee problem, we would put 50 million stem cells into each location. Or you can kind of break it up and, you could do 3 local injections, or up to 4 local injections to get to 200. So that's how this works. Um, this is going to be the interesting part for me to determine, what impact systemic infusions have for MSK patients. One thing to understand is that if you did participate in the MSK trial with the systemic infusion, it's the same cells that you would get would you to participate in another cell co-related trial like a CVD trial. And that's the important thing to recognize, is that the beauty of it is the cells are all the same, and their ability to kind of hone in on what your body needs or what it's struggling with is really where I feel that the incredible potential of this science lies. And how it works is that you would, contact Cellcolabs Clinical. If you meet the criteria to be included, you would have a virtual visit with one of the physicians on the team. We would go over planning of your procedure, map out the best way to approach the conditions that you're having. And then we would begin our consultation with you in the Bahamas, and that's where treatment would be rendered. And so, again, I think the idea here is, for me, and I mentioned it already, is how can IV treatments possibly help MSK conditions? And that is that I've starting to, and I did not before, really accept this idea around chronic inflammation in your body and its impact on your joint. We used to believe like, oh, well, it's an injury, it's genetics, or it's wear and tear. And we understand now that the way chronic inflammation, feeds different and damages different organs, it's very similarly affecting joints. We treat your knee or your shoulder like an organ. In fact, when we inject, we don't just inject a joint and a space. If we see that there's a ligament next to the knee that's damaged or a meniscus, we use precision delivery, and we will approach with putting some cells around each of the structures under ultrasound, because we know we want to target all the potential pain generators, and structurally we want to treat the joint that we're treating as a system or an organ. And so finally, we know that there's clinical evidence that, cell therapy with IV administration continues to appear safe. There was a systematic review. They reviewed, 7,400 citations, and 55 studies. And we know that we can safely administer IV mesenchymal stromal cells. The most important thing, and we've talked about this at length, and that's what I wanted you to take away today, is that we understand where they come from, who made them, how they got to me, are they viable prior to being administered into my body, and how are they being administered IV or injection? What's the process? What's the clinic like? Who's the doctors administering it? All those things are important, because just like anything that we administer in medicine these days, if any one of those components is not well designed or taken care of, this is where you put your body at risk. And that's not what we want. What we want is for people to start experiencing the benefits in a safe manner. So with that, I thank you for your time, and I know that the team behind me is taking some questions, and I hope to be able to provide any further insight. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Patel. And thank you everyone who's attending today, Friday before Christmas. Please, if you have any questions, put them into the chat and we will feed them to Dr. Patel. There's a question on doing top-up treatments.
Yeah, so and if we're talking more about the MSK side, what we generally do, this is general practice, is I always tell patients on the MSK side that we look at sort of where you are around 6 months is a good gauge. And after 6 months, we could consider a booster. We call it boosters or top-offs. I like that word also. And sometimes somewhere between six months and a year is where I would consider a booster. We really want to give the body some time. The process is not immediate. It takes time to see the full effects. But I think somewhere around 6 months and a year are good check-on points to for that.
What is the regulatory body overseeing the clinical trial?
So that's the National Stem Cell Ethics Committee in the Bahamas.
Do you test for vaccination status on origin donors?
So this question has come up, and I won't dive deeply into the science, but we have to understand that there is no concern of what the vaccination status is and the risk to it being transferred to somebody else. It comes up a lot around the COVID vaccine, and it's really because you have to really understand at the time of cell isolation what they're looking for under the microscope to isolate that cell. So that's not a concern that you need to have.
Is the study listed on ct.gov? If so, please provide the link. We will send you it.
I don't have the link for me.
Yeah, I'll find it.
Yeah, you can find it.
How the results so far for disc herniation? How are the results so far for disc herniation?
So we don't currently using these cells for a disc herniation is not an indication in terms of treating it with local injection because we do not inject into the epidural space or into the disc. So in general, I can tell you that autologous cell therapies do show good results for certain conditions. So understanding a disc herniation is really on a case-to-case basis. It takes a little bit more one-on-one discussion.
How is it a clinical trial if you're charging $16,000 for the inclusion?
Yeah, so this is a patient-funded trial. So the clinical trial is around that we are still studying the effects of the treatment. And there's follow-up questionnaires, there's potential for follow-up MRIs or blood work. And ultimately, we will report that data in terms of safety, and we'll start to look at outcomes over time. But yes, it's not a trial that's funded by somebody else and you can opt into.
How long does the treatment last?
So this is a great question, and I don't have a crystal ball on the answer right now. What I can tell you in using autologous therapies from bone marrow, which is your own bone marrow or fat, favorable results can be 2 to 5 years of sustained pain relief. Mother Nature in part of this will always win, okay, over time. However, remember what I said is that we don't fully know how much dose is done in each treatment, and it's hard to predict sometimes. So what we're trying to determine is, well, when we do things with a known dose, can we get a longer, will the treatments last longer? And time will tell. And what I compare it to are the other alternative options, like cortisone injections and things like that. And we do know that cells, when successful, last much longer than that. Okay, great. Well, I wish everyone a wonderful holidays. I hope that provided, some oversight and just education and knowledge. My goal really here is, and I saw one last question that I'll answer, is to raise the bar on awareness. We're in a very, very exciting time in health. We will look back 5 to 10 years from now and be, tremendously impressed with how far we've come. I just want people to make sure wherever you decide to go, whoever you decide to work with, that you're asking the right questions. Because that's the most important thing that you can do is make sure that if you make a choice, you're making the right choice. And we're happy to support your journey. So thank you very much. And then
Last question on results for meniscus
Yeah,
tear.
so actually meniscus is one of the areas that I can say, with confidence that we do see great results. And I'll also say that in the orthopedic space, if you've had surgery, okay, if you've had meniscal repair or had meniscectomy or an ACL tear at some point in your lifespan, you're not operating on a normal joint anymore. And the risk of osteoarthritis is much higher than someone who's not had a joint surgery. And so we have to understand that the concept around using cells, okay, and I talked about that milieu and that maintaining that environment and reducing inflammatory cytokines. The whole goal is also to at least push out or reduce the potential of you developing osteoarthritis, because we know that that's the direction that your joint's going to progress. And so we have seen a lot of patients post-operatively who do these procedures who do quite favorably.
How will stem cells help to complete ACL tear for knee longevity?
How will stem cells help complete it? So, I can tell you that there are numerous findings published by physicians all across the country doing regenerative medicine that ACL tears treated with bone marrow, fat, or a combo, and sometimes it includes PRP when delivered precisely using either ultrasound or X-ray guidance. We have seen complete regeneration of tissue in pre and post imaging within 6 months sometimes. So it does work. Now, we still have a lot to learn on how long, what's the integrity like compared to a surgery, and all those things. We don't have all those answers, but I can tell you, with confidence that we have seen incredible results in ACL tears. And so I saw the question about the disc herniation. So at this time, you would want to seek out a provider that does autologous PRP. And then there's also sometimes a combination of using bone marrow in the discs and PRP in the epidural space. And if you're, because it's not a condition that we can take care of in the trial, you can reach out at physicallongevity.com. It's physical-longevity.com. And you can schedule an info session with one of our physicians to discuss that opportunity in the US. And we can direct you, or you can work with one of our doctors to see if you're a candidate. We're happy to do that virtually.
Amazing. Fantastic, as always, Dr. Patel. I've also
Well,
provided the information email to Cellcolabs Clinical in the chat. So for any further questions, please reach out and our team will get back to you as fast as we can. No published interim results of the trial.
No, not from our trial yet. But if you do searches on the use of stem cells or bone marrow derived stem cells in orthopedic conditions, you'll start to see a lot of literature. And what I will again remind you is that most of it's published for autologous. And so now we're thinking about, well, if we have a known dose, we remove some of the factors out of what might impact the outcome of a procedure. So we'll know, over time we're going to see the results of how this compares. So stay tuned.
Thank you so much, Dr. Patel. Thank you everyone for attending this webinar, and please stay in touch via our email, either to Physical Longevity or to Cellcolabs Clinical. And have a Merry Christmas and a nice holiday.
Take care, everybody. Bye.
Bye.